So great. Good to kind of have all you guys here. You know, we're on the home stretch. I'm sure that we're going to probably have a few people either join us or watch the recording. So just want to say quickly how great it's been for both Rochelle and I to work with such a great group of founders and companies. It's been a lot of fun for us, and I hope we've helped move the needle a little bit. Just a couple things, and actually, Angie, maybe you can, I just had a question for you. I know one thing that we are planning is to do a bit of a survey. So we, you know, obviously the Discovery Foundation, who's one of our sponsors or the main sponsor of this program, is always looking for, you know, feedback. So, you know, be ready for that. Not sure exactly when that'll be happening, but probably over the course of the next few weeks. We also do have a networking event coming up, which is an in-person networking event. I think that the location is still to be determined. The date is June 23rd, or at least tentatively. So hopefully we'll get a chance to meet face-to-face there. And then we are also planning, as part of this overall program, even though last week is the last of the 8 weeks, we are planning a follow-up session probably in the first couple of weeks of September. So we will keep you posted on that. What we're going to try to do is set it up for the exact same time, like on the Wednesdays and Thursdays. So you can just kind of schedule it in your calendar. So anyway, so I'll just move on to the topic of the day, which is partners and channels. And what I'm going to cover here is again, from a high level point of view, you know, why you want to consider partnering, you know, what are the benefits, the types, various types of partnerships and channels, and what might make sense for you. Some things to consider as you enter into a partnership or consider partnerships. I'm going to talk a little bit about some elements around negotiating an agreement, because oftentimes as you get into more formal partnerships, it requires, you know, some contractual agreements. I'm going to talk about some potential pitfalls, which are things to be aware of as you enter into partnerships or start considering partnerships, some of the key success factors, and also give you some examples of why in some cases partnerships fail. And then I'll leave a little time for Q&A. Before I kind of get into the why partner, I mean, the one thing, just to kind of set a context, is obviously there's lots of different types of partnerships, and some that extend beyond just sales and marketing. But for the context of this, I'm mainly talking about sales and marketing partnerships, but I will touch on a couple of other types of partnerships as well. So why partner? You know, the key thing, and why most, at least startups, are looking to partner is, you know, partners can help broaden your reach and also kind of extend your resources. So a startup with limited resources may not be able to kind of have salespeople in every region or touch every industry, but partners can help you do that. So they can help you, you know, whether it's a region, try to extend into new regions where you're not currently present, or different industries, different segments, et cetera. So that's really kind of the key reason why most people look to partner. Often, you know, you may be partnering with a larger organization that have a large existing customer base. You know, one of the experiences that I had at SAP, you know, SAP kind of owns around 40,000 large enterprise customers. So we had tons of people who wanted to partner with us because they wanted access into that customer base. So if you can partner with an organization that has an existing customer base, oftentimes that gives you, you know, better access to those customers. The other thing is partners can bring credibility and trust. And so again, you know, as a startup, a lot of people may not know who you are, but by partnering with a larger organization that has kind of logo recognition, it's something that automatically can give you some additional credibility. The other thing is in some cases, depending on the nature of the partnership, it allows you to leverage their marketing muscle and sales capacity. So especially in kind of a reseller or OEM type relationships, you know, the partner may be doing a lot of the marketing effort, and their sales teams might be driving, you know, the revenues for your solution. So again, very hard for a startup maybe to scale in a fast and broad way. Oftentimes partners can help you do that. And again, so oftentimes they'll take on various roles. So not only sales and marketing, but sometimes support, you know, services, other things as well. So they can obviously drive some revenue, but obviously, you know, they're looking for something in return. And oftentimes, you know, depending on the nature of the partnership, they're looking to take some, percentage of the top line, and that's, often, anywhere from 10 to 50%. And to give an example, SAP, when we did deals with companies that we actually sold their solutions, SAP took 60%. So something to be aware of when you make some of your calculations about what partnerships might make sense. The other interesting thing is partners can become potential investors. So especially if you're partnering with a larger firm, you may have some kind of interesting technology that they're interested in bringing to their customers. They can oftentimes become potential investors and/or acquisition targets or to be acquired by, and also a lot of these partners may have their own venture arms. It's very common in a lot of different industries that some organizations have their own venture arms. And the one thing that's worth kind of stressing is that you don't need to be, partnerships and direct sales channels are not mutually exclusive. You can employ both. So you can still have your direct sales and continue to grow that and expand that, and at the same time employ a partner or channel strategy and kind of grow along kind of both trajectories. So something to consider. It's not an either or proposition. So types of channels and partners, there's kind of a lot of a lot of different types of ways you can enter into relationships with organizations. Some are quite simple and lower touch, so similar to sales in some ways, and some are much more kind of complex and kind of higher engagement. So one is just kind of affiliates and referrals, and this might be something as simple as like a listing on a website, or just somebody who agrees to refer a customer to you. You might give them, usually in that type of situation, you're giving them a smaller, piece of the pie. It might be a month's worth of SaaS revenue or 10% of the first year revenue or something like that. The other thing, which is somewhat similar to that, is partner marketplaces. Now, these oftentimes require more of an integration. And if you think of, like, for instance, the Salesforce.com, they have their app exchange. They were actually one of the really first big app exchanges. But now, like most platforms, have some kind of a partner marketplace, including actually Zoom now has created their own. So there's a lot of add-on apps that you can use, to integrate into Zoom and have a panel in Zoom. Obviously, Shopify, others. There's lots of organizations that have partner marketplaces. But like I say, it usually does require some level of integration, which you're responsible for. The other thing is kind of a co-sell partner, and this might be where you have a solution that's complementary to another company's solution, and you guys just go to market together, and where they sell their stuff, you sell their your stuff, but the customer is interested in maybe a bigger holistic solution, and so you can do that kind of cooperatively. There are some kind of pitfalls, and we'll talk about that a little bit later about co-selling, and it's mainly around kind of competition for budget, even though you may not compete as far as your individual solutions, but there's always a limited budget, and sometimes there's competition for that budget between co-sell partners. And then the other one that's very common, especially in the software world, is resellers and VARs. VARs is just value-added reseller, which is typically a reseller that provides services and implementation and stuff like that, training. So this is more where, like, now we're getting into the situation where they're actually, reselling your solution. They're doing a lot of the sales and marketing effort. Services partner is another one. So, this could be everything from the big systems integrators in the enterprise space, like, the Accentures of the world, to just consulting partners and services partners. So oftentimes they're interested in the service aspect. They don't care so much about maybe the license or other piece of the business. So they will sell or help resell or sell or help you sell your solution so that they can get a piece of the services pie. And then obviously in more kind of a physical product, there's retail and distribution, which is quite common. That could be everything from, like an actual distributor or a retailer, wholesalers, there's a whole bunch of different things that fall into that category. The other one is OEM and white label. And so this, OEM is original equipment manufacturer, and this is something that really became really big in the automotive space. Most cars, many components of most cars are not built by the actual car manufacturer. They're built by another manufacturer. And so those are OEMs. And it's actually quite common in software now as well. In fact, when I first started working in Crystal, Crystal was essentially put on the map by doing OEM deals with other software companies. So their reporting solution was actually embedded in literally hundreds, if not thousands, of software solutions. And that's what really put Crystal on the map. And it's definitely, and typically what it means, in some cases, it could be a little simpler without a lot of deep integration, but usually it's, your branding is no longer appearing and it's being branded under your partner's name. And then there's also technical alliances and certifications. And this is stuff like, the Microsoft certified partner and Oracle. Is a whole bunch of these guys where you get kind of a certification that you either integrate with their solutions or that you know how to implement their solutions, etc. And the one comment is that you can evolve. You could start with an affiliate or referral program and then get into a reseller program. And so it often makes sense to kind of do what's easier and simpler to start and kind of test the waters with kind of a referral type partnership, and then maybe graduate to more of a reseller type arrangement. And then there's other types of partnerships. There's some kind of co-marketing arrangements. You see this a lot in the retail space and in physical products. You see it in a lot with toys. Obviously, you see things with like fast food restaurants and toys and all that kind of stuff, comic books and movies. So there's a lot of different types of co-marketing arrangements. It's really popular with contests and stuff like that. But it is a possible way to, if you can find somebody that's complementary, you could just do more of a co-marketing arrangement. The other thing is there's influencers. So that's kind of, I guess somewhat of a new type of partnership where you kind of work with an influencer. And again, this could be social media influencers, could be athletes, could be artists, whatever, but there are, and it could even just be a thought leader or an expert in a particular field that you kind of partner with them to kind of help you kind of increase awareness or whatever. The other one that a lot of people overlook are industry analysts, and this is probably more a play in the enterprise space. But usually in enterprise, if there's a specific segment of software or technology, there's an industry analyst who covers that. And I always recommend that people kind of try to get in touch with and understand who the analysts are in their space, let them know who you are. And while they're not going to resell your solution, they may help kind of bring you to the table in certain situations. So always good to understand who the analysts are and see if you can get kind of coverage by them. And the media can also be a partner. I know of some companies who actually have done partnerships where they've got kind of free media and PR coverage by giving specific technical expertise to that media partner. So it may be on a really unique kind of technology like quantum physics or something like that, where obviously that particular media outlet may not have anybody with expertise, and so they want to partner with somebody who can help them on the expertise side, and then we'll kind of give them a little bit of a PR. And then of course there's lots of other types of roles besides sales and marketing that you can partner with people on. That's support, services, etc. So there's it's not just around sales and marketing. There's lots of other roles that partners can fulfill for you. So getting into kind of things to consider. So as you're looking at potential partners, one thing is do they have adjacency to your solution? Like, are they in the same space? Is there a complementary aspect of what you're doing and what they're doing? Now, sometimes those are not as obvious as they seem. But there is, it's necessary to either that you share kind of an adjacency in your solution or that you share the same target market. If you don't share either, then there's really probably not much value in you partnering with that organization. So it's just something to think about are they, are they targeting the same people that you're targeting, the same personas, the same organizations, or are they, do they have an adjacency to your solution? Now, as I mentioned, one reason you might want to partner is to get into a different market, maybe a different segment, a different region, or a different industry that you're currently not in. So you can consider that. But the problem is, usually you need to still have gone through, the various stages of proof, like, done some customer validation in that industry or that segment, proven your business model before, a partner, you should be looking to take on a partner. So they may be able to help you extend into that, but you still need to do a bit of your own work in order to validate that market. The other thing to think about, and this is one thing I find that people don't think about enough, is what's in it for them. Like, you often think about, hey, I would really like to partner with this organization because they've got this great customer base and et cetera, but they don't really think about, well, why would that partner be interested in partnering with you? And so that's really important, is to think about, what's in it for them. Why might they be interested in partnering with you? And oftentimes it is because there's a specific hole in their offering. So they may have, maybe it's a feature that they really don't provide, that maybe their competition provides. So they're looking for somebody to work with that can help fill that hole. They may want to provide kind of a broader solution to their customers. So they're looking to partner with an organization who can help bring some other aspect to their, to the table. Sometimes it's strictly a revenue or margin opportunity. That's all they're interested in. So if there's an opportunity to drive, additional revenue and they get 30% margin or whatever, they're happy with that. And sometimes it adds additional sales or services for them. So again, especially with services partners, they're interested in driving services. So they'll partner with you because your product, pulls along some services, or in some cases by helping sell your solution, it then drives add-on sales for their solutions. But it is really important to give some thought about what is in it for the partner. The other thing to consider, one thing that comes up a lot is partners, especially when you're a small startup and you're partnering with a large organization. They often ask for exclusivity. And I recommend that you avoid exclusivity totally, if possible, although it's not always possible. And if it's not possible, then try to limit it in some other way. So either having a limited term, or say, hey, we'll give exclusivity to you for a year, or by a specific region. So, hey, we'll give you exclusivity in Latin America or in Europe, but not in the US, or maybe by a specific customer segment or type or industry or whatever. So if you can limit exclusivity, it makes sense. And the reason why I recommend people try to avoid exclusivity is if you sign an agreement with a company, a 2-year agreement with a company to be the exclusive reseller of your solution, and for whatever reason, they're not successful doing it, now you've just kind of created an opportunity cost for yourself because you can't go partner with somebody else to do that. So this is why you typically want to avoid exclusivity. The other thing is you can say, well, I will give you exclusivity providing you deliver X dollars in revenue every year. So you might say, hey, if you do 500,000 in year 1, $1 million in year 2, I'm happy with that. If you don't, then the exclusivity goes away and we have the right to partner with somebody else, or at least renegotiate the deal. So anyway, something to consider when you're talking to partnerships. The other thing is pricing consideration. So, a lot of people don't realize that you can't dictate what price a partner sells a product for, even if it's your product. So you can certainly set a manufacturer's suggested retail price, but you can't actually force them to sell at that price. That's legal in both Canada and the US, I believe in Europe as well. So the partner has to be able, they may decide to discount your product. They may decide to give your product away. Now you can still say, well, there's a minimum amount that you pay us, right? So this is one reason why I recommend if you're doing a deal where you're giving them some margin, don't necessarily just give them a percent of the selling price, because if they discount it by 50%, then you're you're getting a lot lower amount. So just say it's, you might say, hey, you have to pay us X dollars, which is 70% of your normal selling price or whatever. But it is something to consider that you lose control of pricing to some extent. Not always. I mean, partners may sell at your manufacturer's suggested price, but there's a potential to lose control of pricing. And then there's also the potential for sales conflict. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. It's usually not a problem for startups, and there are some ways that you can address it. And what I mean by sales conflict, it's typically when if you have a direct sales force and the partner are trying to sell it to the same customer, and all of a sudden you're actually competing with your partner, and it can be a big issue but it's usually more of an issue in larger organizations. And then the other thing to think about is, do you have the capacity to scale? So one thing that I've seen is where all of a sudden a small startup signs a deal with a big partner and it's very successful, and all of a sudden sales multiply by 10 times. Do you have the ability to support that level of customers if there's onboarding required, if there's support required? In the case of physical products, if there's supply chain issues to consider. So you need to think about, are you ready, and what is your readiness to scale? I mean, it's a good problem to have, but literally it can kill companies as well if you're not prepared to scale, and all of a sudden that growth comes in and you're not prepared. So the one thing that's really important is as you go into partnerships, and here I'm talking really more when we're getting into more detailed partnerships like resellers and OEMs, and is to really make it clear what the roles and responsibilities are. And I've seen a lot of times where partnerships have kind of gone off the rails because those were never clearly defined, or people just didn't think about, hey, who's actually responsible for this when something comes up. So really critical that who is doing what. So obviously, sales and marketing is one, and who is responsible, by the way, for paying for it as well. So if there's some marketing efforts, are they doing all the marketing? Are they doing all the messaging? Are they doing all the sales, including paying their salespeople commission, et cetera? Things like inventory management and supply chain. So if you have a physical product, are they expecting you, every time they do a sale, you have to ship the product to the customer, or in fact, they're going to buy product, hold it in inventory, and they'll ship it? And that's especially important if you have a physical product that's shipping with their physical product. Typically they want, you want them to arrive together. And so, coordinating that inventory management is important. The other thing is just delivery, shipping and installation. So, shipping itself, again, with physical products can be, reasonably expensive, and could be a factor that can impact margins. And then installation, whether it's for, even software, if it's a complex solution and needs hand-holding, who's doing that? Is it the reseller or is it you? Typically the best case situation in reseller type arrangements is that you have a single point of contact for the customer, so that typically that reseller should take on those roles, but again, needs to be clearly defined. The other thing is invoicing and accounts receivable, so who's actually taking care of that. And training. So, again, are you training the customers, or are you training their trainers and they train the customers? Again, can be a big, a task if you need to do a bunch of training for all of their deals, and also for training their support team, their sales teams, et cetera. So good to understand in advance who's doing that. And then also support can be a big deal, especially, for almost any solution, certainly for software. So typically, you would want the partner to do the first level support, again, being the first point of contact with the customer. And then you would provide second level support to their support teams. So definitely something you need to get sorted out. The other thing is renewals. And this is something that a lot of people forget about, is thinking about, hey, what happens upon renewals? And the reason, and often when I've talked before in kind of sales compensation, you know, oftentimes with salespeople, you only pay them commission for the first year, and for instance, the SaaS solution. And then you have a separate team that does the renewals because the cost of renewing is quite a bit lower than the cost of doing a new deal. So that's the same with partners. If you're paying them 30% margin on the original sale, you probably don't want to pay them 30% on renewals. So it could be that you just handle renewals, or that they do renewals, but you pay them kind of like a different margin potentially. And that's not necessarily the case, but again, it's something to think about, define, you know, how are you going to handle renewals? And then also, it's sometimes good to think in advance about, is there any co-marketing funding? And this would be more for things like events or specific collateral or whatever. You know, oftentimes partners may be looking for you to do some funding or at least creation of marketing materials, etc. And then the other thing is to have some kind of account management. So that's not really so much a role. It's something that each partner should have somebody responsible for doing, because, you know, partnerships don't kind of run on automatic. It's, you know, it's a relationship, and you need to have somebody who's managing that relationship, especially as you get into these more complex partnerships. And it's really the ones that work the best is when you have essentially an account manager, or at least a key point of contact on both sides who are kind of communicating regularly. So just a couple things to think about, you know, as you get into, or if you get into kind of more complex agreements. Again, one which I just talked about is making sure that those responsibilities are clearly defined. And literally, if you're entering into a legal agreement, they should be in the legal agreement. It might be as part of a statement of work or a schedule or whatever, but those should be defined in the agreement. The other thing that a lot of people kind of don't think about enough is how and when revenues are reported. So this is, again, in a situation more where you have a reseller or an OEM partner who might be embedding and selling your solution. You know, oftentimes it's not like, hey, I sold a deal and I'm going to pay you the revenue right now. It's going to be like, I'll report at the end of some period, and then you can invoice me and then I'll pay you. And I've seen a lot of deals where, especially with large companies, they'll say, yeah, okay, we'll report the revenues 45 days after the end of the quarter. And then they have, you know, 45 to 60 day payment terms. And the result of that is if you were to sign a deal, or if they were to sign a deal, for instance, January 1st, and it's 45 days after the end of the quarter, they wouldn't even report that deal to you until May 15th, and you wouldn't get paid till July 1st. So now you've given them 6 months terms. Essentially, they've collected the money from the partner, but you haven't. So revenue reporting is a pretty important thing to think about. Typically, I'd suggest you have monthly reporting and try to have no more than 15 days after the end of the month, and try not to have more than 30 days of terms, or you find some other way. And again, a little would depend on volume. If they're doing like a small number of large deals, maybe it is reported when every deal is closed, but usually when it's any kind of a volume, there's some kind of a period type reporting. So something to keep in mind. Payment terms, again, you know, a lot of big companies especially have 45 or 60 day terms. The good thing is they usually pay you. The bad thing is they usually, you know, take longer terms. The other thing, I talked a little bit about exclusivity. So, you know, again, it's something that will come up sometimes in agreements. The other thing is reciprocity. So oftentimes, for instance, especially with big organizations, they'll say, well, they have the right to audit you, but you don't have the right to audit them. So usually, you know, if I'm involved or advising somebody, I'll say, hey, you know, make that reciprocal, because, you know, you should have every right that they have around stuff like audits and that, you should have the same rights to them. Service level agreements is something, especially with software, can be something, a consideration. You know, oftentimes there's service level agreements that require 99.9% 9%, uptime, and often sometimes there are penalties if you don't have that, and that might be fine, but you need to consider things like, are there force majeure, like situations where there's disasters or power outages or earthquakes or whatever. You need to make sure that you're covered, and also to make sure that it's really just as it relates to the specific service or whatever it is you're offering, not kind of the broader solution, or like, the customer's Wi-Fi goes down and all of a sudden that's your service level issue. So you need to make sure that those are fairly well defined. And then one thing I recommend to people, especially dealing with big organizations, is don't be bullied into a bad deal. It can happen sometimes with startups, and be prepared to walk away, because a bad deal can actually burden you fairly seriously, especially if it's a longer term deal. And then also make sure you go through the boilerplate terms in detail. It can be really boring reading a 40-page legal agreement, but unfortunately, there every now and then can be some things hidden in there that you want to be aware of. And I always recommend you definitely get a lawyer to review any kind of a contractual agreement. So some of the potential pitfalls, and this is kind of generally about partnerships in general, especially, again, reseller type arrangements. But one thing is that there's the potential to lose control over your messaging and the customer experience. So again, if you have a partner and they're doing kind of the sales and marketing, even if you have a hand in the marketing, you can't control, you're not in the room with their salespeople. And so you can, to some extent, lose some control over the messaging and customer experience. So just something to be aware of. And partly it depends a little bit on the type of organization you're partnering with. So you really want to understand kind of that you have an alignment from kind of a vision point of view, that they kind of treat customers in the way you would, et cetera. Anyways, it's just something to be aware of. The other thing is oftentimes you just lose contact with your customers. And there's lots of deals that I've been involved in where the partner doesn't even report the name of the customer. They'll report, yeah, I sold 10 deals, but you don't know who the customer is that they sold to. So it is something to be aware of. And even when you do know who the customer is, you just lose that opportunity to kind of hear back from the customer, understand if there's new features that they might be looking for. So it is, especially if you're working exclusively with partners, it is a potential downfall a little bit that you lose that direct contact. I mentioned earlier, there is a potential to lose some pricing control. So it's just something to be aware of. Not typically a major issue, but it can be in some cases. Partners can also become competitors, and this can be partners who are, resellers or OEMs. They might embed your solution for a period of time, and then they decide to build, your solution. And I have certainly heard of some partners who enter into partnerships just so they can kind of test the waters and get a better understanding of the solution so they can build their own. So it is something you need to be aware of. Again, not something you can really protect yourself too much from. It's just kind of go in with your eyes wide open. And obviously there is this whole concept of co-opetition, which is very common. It's super common in the technology and software area. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to partner with competitors. It's interesting, when I worked at SAP, I've never seen two companies who hated each other more than SAP and Oracle, and still that's the case. But yet SAP was Oracle's biggest reseller. So SAP sold more Oracle databases than any other company in the world, and yet literally they had just a complete hate on for each other. So again, you can actually partner with your competitors. The other thing to think about is or to be careful of is becoming too dependent on a single large partner. So that's again, it's great if you sign a deal with a partner and all of a sudden you're doing millions of dollars worth of revenue. But if all of a sudden something falls through with that partnership, or they decide to go in a different direction, you know, if you're super dependent on a single large partner, it just puts you at risk. It's kind of like being dependent on a single customer. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, channel conflict. And again, I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. So success factors, you know, one is kind of having clear goals and objectives. So like, you know, understanding what they're trying to achieve and what you're trying to achieve, make sure they understand that. And especially if it's around kind of reselling of a solution, you know, even understanding, you know, what kind of, you know, volumes you expect and what types of things, you know, you're trying to get out of the arrangement. Again, shared KPIs and metrics. So that's somewhat the same. It's also really important that you're speaking the same language. You know, I've seen situations where even within an organization where, you know, one person will be talking revenue and another will be talking MRR and another one will be talking ACV, annual contract value, and they're using kind of different metrics and KPIs, and all of a sudden people are confused of, you know, are we actually achieving what we thought we were trying to do. Again, clearly defined roles and responsibilities, having a dedicated owner or account manager on both sides. Sometimes doing actual business planning. So again, with a large partner, if you're doing, like I would say even $100,000 worth of business through a partner, if possible, it's good to kind of do some kind of an annual business plan with them. If you have an account manager on their side, to kind of sit down and say, hey, like, what are we trying to achieve? You know, or what kind of growth, you know, should we be trying to do? What can we do to enhance that, et cetera. So just kind of taking a general sense and putting your finger on the pulse of the business and saying, you know, how do we move this forward? Sales compensation is a really important thing, and I'll talk about that a little bit of why partnerships fail. But one thing that I have seen is where a partner does not pay their salespeople a commission to sell your product. So they might be a reseller, but they're not paying their competition for their salespeople for your product. And I always say salespeople are coin operated. So if there's no compensation, then the chance of them doing a deal is very remote, unless your product is like very critical to their sale. So you know, it's really important to understand kind of how they intend to compensate their sales team. And sometimes that even it's important also for you to understand kind of what they're doing and what their expectations are. So trying to get involved with even forecast and pipeline reviews. And that might just be like a monthly report, but I always, you know, suggest that you actually write that into kind of an agreement or whatever is let's do monthly or at least quarterly forecast and pipeline, you know, reviews, just to understand kind of where we're going and how things are proceeding. Again, co-marketing MDF. So MDF is market development funds. It's, you know, if you can kind of get some agreement to kind of have some funding, whether it's on your side or on the other side, but market development funds and marketing funds can kind of help kind of grease the wheels of a partnership a bit. And then obviously having a win-win mindset is really critical. So it's like I said, you have to understand what's in it for them and trying to help them achieve their goals. It's not all about you. And then I'm just going to talk quickly about some of the things that I've seen about why partnerships fail. And some of these are some of the things, just kind of the flip side of the success factors. But one thing is, and this is, again, I find the same thing happens with sales sometimes, is that you try to enter into a partnership or you try to hire a salesperson to sell something when you haven't even really proven your value proposition or business model. And so it's really critical that that's done. I mean, first of all, if the partner's smart, he wouldn't partner with you if that was unproven, but they don't always know that. But it's, you know, you can't expect the partner to kind of prove your value proposition or to do your customer validation for you. And even if you are entering into a different segment. So if you're asking a partner, you know, hey, I want you to take me into enterprise because I sell into SMB, or vice versa, or into a specific industry that you might not address, it's better if you can actually, you know, do a little bit of that yourself and prove your value proposition, and that you have a repeated business model, and then, you know, enter into a partnership, rather than just kind of expect a partner to kind of prove that. Because just because you're successful in SMB doesn't mean you will be in enterprise, or if you're successful in construction, it doesn't mean you're going to be in mining. So you're better off to prove that first. Now, regional, it's a little bit less of an issue, but it can even be an issue with kind of regional expansion, just because sometimes there's different competitors and other, you know, other considerations. So the other thing is you know, having a lack of alignment between your solution or the market. So if there's just no real kind of complementary aspect, you know, it oftentimes, and by the way, I have seen people enter into partnerships like that, but they usually don't go anywhere, or they don't, you know, have a great deal of success. Again, kind of just a lack of clear objectives and plan, and that's really, a lot of that's just around kind of communicating that and understanding upfront what you're trying to achieve and what they're trying to achieve, and how you guys are going to do that together. Poor communication can also be an issue, and this is something that's sometimes hard to control, because, you know, again, they may even assign an account manager, all of a sudden that person leaves and now nobody is owning the relationship on the other side. So that's a bit of a warning sign if there isn't somebody on the other side. Again, not so much an issue if it's just a referral agreement, but if you have kind of a reseller agreement that you have high expectations of, and you don't have a counterpart on the other side trying to manage the relationship, can be a bit of a problem. And then the lack of sales buy-in. So again, this ties mainly to compensation. If the sales team itself, you know, the senior management might think, you know, this is a great partnership, but if the sales team isn't bought in, if they think it's too complex, if they think your solution is going to lengthen their sales cycle, you know, there's a lot of reasons sales might not get bought in, and if you have a lack of sales buy-in, even if senior management is totally in favor, you may not, you know, see the kind of uptake that you want. And those are the kind of things that people sometimes don't think about, not only the compensation piece, but also things like sales cycles and other things. So if they have a perception that your solution is negatively impacting their existing sales cycle or their capability to hit their targets, then they're not going to support it. And then this is somewhat tied into that, but this is more related to when there is you know, a co-sell type of arrangement, but it can happen even in a reseller type agreement, where there's kind of a competition for available budget. And even when the salespeople are compensated, you know, again, the sales manager, he's more focused on hitting a certain target for his solution. So sometimes that can be an issue if a customer has a limited budget, and their product and your product are both kind of vying for part of that budget, then sometimes that could be an issue. So just something to be aware of. And channel conflict I mentioned. So I'll talk about it real quickly. So generally when I mention channel conflict, it's usually what I'm referring to is when an organization has their own direct sales team and a partner channel, and the two get into conflict. And it's not totally uncommon if you're, you know, again, if you're selling it to, for instance, hospitals, and you sign up a partner who also sells into hospitals, you know, there's a chance you could both be selling into the same hospital. And that can become a problem, especially because, again, you can't control the partner's pricing. They could undercut your sales guy. Your sales guy could be saying, oh, don't buy from them, buy from us. Again, generally not a problem with a startup. It's usually a bigger problem when you already have like a very broad kind of sales coverage, both within your organization and the partner. So that's usually when those types of issues arise. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but it is an issue. One way to address it is to have, you know, a clearer delineation of what segment or region or type of customer the partner sells into, and which ones you sell into. Now, again, if they have an existing solution, maybe it's they sell it to their existing customer base, whatever. There's a lot of different ways you can delineate that. The other thing is deal registration. And again, you don't want to do this with really low value products, but if it's a higher value enterprise product, then you set up a system where they literally say, hey, I'm talking to this hospital, are you talking to them? And if you are, then say, no, we're already talking to them. But if you're not, then you register that as their deal, and your guys would not sell to them. So that is a system that a lot of people use in the enterprise space. And then there's also sometimes you say, well, okay, we'll just work together and we'll split the revenues, or we'll do, we'll let you take the deal, but we'll compensate our sales guy for it. So there's a lot of things you can do around kind of compensation, which kind of can resolve channel conflict. But again, I don't want to, even though I've mentioned it a couple of times, it's typically not a big issue for smaller organizations. So next steps. So what I'd recommend is take a look at whether you think partnerships make sense for you. Evaluate your partner readiness. Do you have kind of the resources in place to kind of manage partners? Do you have kind of the support organization that might be able to support them? Do you have the marketing and other tools, et cetera? So I mean, just think about not only what partners you want, but look at yourself and see if you're really ready to get into kind of a partnership. Obviously, identify those kind of partners who might be right for you. One way to do that is to look at your customers and try to get a sense, or even ask them, what are other solutions that they're deploying. It's a great way to kind of understand, like if you happen to be selling into a SMB segment and everybody is using Sage Accounting, well, then maybe a Sage Accounting VAR is a good potential partner for you. So just something to think about there. The other thing is you can research in larger organizations. A lot of companies have like very well-defined partner programs. So you can just look into what their partner programs are. So they actually have people who are designated to kind of, manage to onboard partners, et cetera. By the way, a lot of partner programs charge fees. So it might cost you $10,000 to become a partner. Oftentimes those fees can be negotiated away. So don't worry too much about that initially. I mean, some organizations won't negotiate them, but I've seen many times that organizations will kind of drop those fees. And then obviously do your outreach, and a lot of that is similar to your kind of sales outreach. The one thing I would recommend, or I would just mention, is that if you're reaching out to an organization who doesn't typically partner, it's a little bit more complex discussion, because you really need to sell them on the what's in it for them. Whereas if it's an organization who has a partner program, right, they already understand the value of partnering. They kind of have the resources in place. So it's something to think about. Not that it's impossible, to partner with organizations that don't currently have partners, but it can just be a little bit more complex discussion. And then think about where you want to start. Do you want to get into like an OEM type partnership, or a reseller partnership, which has a lot of advantages, but they're certainly more complex partnerships, and there's kind of more legal kind of aspects? Or do you want to kind of start with just like a referral type arrangement and then kind of see where it goes from there? So good to think about that. And then also think about the tools and resources you might need. So this might be marketing collateral, stuff like knowledge bases for support. And a lot of those are good tools for you to have anyway for your own staff. But sometimes by entering into a partnership, it causes you to formalize some of those. And so as you're getting ready to enter a partnership, it's good to kind of have some of those things, like set up and ready to go. And then, evaluate your results regularly, if possible with the partner, but if not, on your own, and just say, is is this partnership really kind of delivering the value for the organization that we had intended? You know, I would say that despite best intentions, you know, a lot of partnerships just don't work for whatever reason. You know, you enter into it with the best of expectations, but you know, sometimes it just doesn't work out. So, and again, that could be just misalignment in kind of incentives, or misalignment in objectives or goals, or just like a lack of motivation on the side of the partner. But it's just, you know, important to make sure you're getting what you expected out of the partnership. And that's it. So that's been a lot of talking. And so I'll just open it up and see if there's any questions, and take it from there.